Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Anyone who has spent enough winters in the northern United States understands that snow doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it doesn't fall at all. It hunts. That particular Monday in late January, the sky over northern Minnesota had the dull, exhausted look of something that had already decided how the day would end. The clouds were low and colorless, stretching from horizon to horizon like an unwashed sheet pulled tight over the world. The road beneath my tires matched it perfectly, white blending into white, until there was no longer a clear line between earth and sky. I was driving south along Highway 61, heading back toward Duluth after visiting my aunt near the small town of Silver Bay. It was a drive I'd made countless times over the years, especially after finishing my clinical training and settling into a permanent position at a regional hospital along Lake Superior. Most of my classmates from the 2017 program scattered across the Midwest, but I stayed close to the lake. The pay was decent, and the isolation suited me. The weather forecast that morning had been almost dismissive. Light snow, the meteorologist said. Reduced visibility in spots. Nothing that raised alarms for someone who grew up learning to drive on ice-covered back roads before I was old enough to vote. I left my aunt's house a little after 4 in the afternoon, confident I'd be home before the storm gained any real strength. My SUV had winter tires, a full tank of gas, and an emergency kit in the back I'd never once had to use. I even remember glancing at the sky and thinking how familiar it all felt. Just another winter drive, nothing more. That confidence lasted exactly an hour. By the time darkness began to settle, the flurries had thickened into something aggressive. Snow no longer drifted downward. It moved sideways, driven by wind that seemed to come from every direction at once. My headlights cut through the storm in weak, trembling beams that barely reached the road ahead. I slowed to 25 miles per hour, then 20. The lake disappeared first, swallowed by the storm to my right. Then the forest vanished to my left, the tall pines dissolving into a blur of shifting shadows. The world narrowed until all that existed was a short stretch of road ahead of me and the constant, exhausting effort of keeping the vehicle centered within it. Traffic thinned quickly. At first, there were a few cars, headlights passing cautiously in the opposite direction, tail lights fading ahead of me. But gradually, one by one, they vanished. 10 minutes passed without seeing another vehicle. Then 20. That should have been my sign to pull over. Instead, I convinced myself the next town was close. That stopping on the shoulder in near zero visibility was more dangerous than continuing forward. That I had driven through worse. That's the mistake winter waits for you to make. The loss of traction happened without warning. 1 second I was steady, focused, alert. The next, my back tire slipped on a hidden patch of black ice concealed beneath fresh snow. The steering wheel went light in my hands, disconnected from the road. The SUV spun, once, twice. The world outside the windshield turned into a spinning blur of white and dark. My stomach dropped as the vehicle slid sideways, helpless, toward the shallow ditch lining the highway. The impact came suddenly. A heavy thud followed by a violent jolt that snapped my head forward. Snow exploded across the hood, and then everything stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing but wind. It screamed across the open highway, rocking the vehicle hard enough that I wondered if it might tip over. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out my thoughts. I forced myself to breathe. I checked my body slowly, deliberately. Neck, shoulders, arms, hands, legs. Everything moved. Nothing burned or throbbed the way it would have if I were seriously injured. The airbags hadn't deployed, which told me the crash hadn't been as severe as it felt. But when I shifted into reverse and pressed the gas, the tires spun uselessly. I tried rocking the vehicle forward and back the way my father taught me years ago. It didn't help. The SUV was wedged at an angle that offered no traction at all. Outside, snow was already piling against the driver's side door. I could watch it climbing inch by inch through the window. That's when I reached for my phone. No signal, not even a flicker. That stretch of Highway 61 was infamous for dead zones, but I'd never truly understood what that meant until I needed help, and realized there was absolutely no way to call for it. The temperature inside the car dropped fast. I kept the engine running for heat, doing mental calculations about fuel. How long could I last? How often should I shut the engine off to conserve gas? The wind grew louder, gusts slamming into the vehicle hard enough to make it shudder. Snow swirled past the windows in chaotic spirals, hypnotic and terrifying at the same time. I told myself to stay calm. Someone would come. People drove this highway all the time, even in bad weather. I just had to wait. Nearly 40 minutes passed before I saw headlights. They appeared suddenly in my rearview mirror. Two pale yellow orbs cutting through the storm like the eyes of something slow and deliberate. Relief flooded through me so powerfully, it almost hurt. I hadn't realized how tense I was until that moment. The vehicle approached cautiously. As it drew closer, I could make out the shape of an older pickup truck with an extended cab. Rust climbed along the wheel wells, and snow caked the front grille. It pulled onto the shoulder behind me, hazard lights blinking weakly through the whiteout. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. The man who stepped out moved against the wind with an ease that immediately struck me as strange. He wore a heavy canvas jacket the color of dried mud and a thick wool cap pulled low over his ears. His movements were unhurried, almost relaxed, as if he were walking across a grocery store parking lot instead of trudging through a blizzard. He stopped beside my window. I rolled it down just enough to speak through, and the cold air rushed in, biting my face and hands. Up close, he looked to be in his mid-50s. His skin was weathered, deeply lined, the face of someone who had spent decades outdoors. His nose had been broken at least once and healed crooked. His eyes were pale, so pale they were almost colorless. They didn't feel friendly. They felt measuring. He smiled, showing teeth slightly too small for his mouth, and said he'd seen me slide off the road about a mile back. Said he'd turned around to help. His voice was calm, steady, carrying that stretched northern accent that usually put people at ease. He told me his name. I thanked him, told him I was okay, just stuck. Explained that I had roadside assistance and would wait for a tow truck. He listened without interrupting, nodding slowly. Then he glanced up and down the empty highway. "There won't be anyone coming tonight," he said. I asked what he meant. He said the county had closed the road east of here, said the storm was getting worse, said I was lucky he'd come along when he did. Something about the way he said, "lucky," made my skin crawl. When he reached for my door handle and found it locked, his smile didn't change, but his eyes did. Something flickered there, quick and dark. He told me to unlock the door. Said his truck had four-wheel drive and chains. Said he could get me somewhere warm. I refused. Politely. Firmly. He stared at me through the narrow window gap for a long moment. Snow accumulated on his shoulders and hat, but he didn't seem to notice. Then he walked around the back of my vehicle. I twisted in my seat, trying to see what he was doing through the rear window, but the glass was fogged and snow blurred everything beyond it. That's when I heard the sound. A sharp hiss. It took me a second to recognize it. Air escaping. I honked the horn, long, desperate blasts that vanished into the storm. He returned to my window with a look of patient disappointment, like someone dealing with a stubborn child. He wedged his boot against my door, leaning in close enough that his breath fogged the glass. "You don't have much choice now," he said calmly. "I'm trying to save your life." The hissing continued. Then I saw headlights approaching in the distance. Hope surged through me. I laid on the horn, screaming, pounding the steering wheel. The man turned to look. For a second, I thought he might leave. Instead, he moved. Fast. He climbed onto the hood of my car, pulling a dark canvas tarp from his truck and spreading it across my windshield with quick, practiced movements. The world went black. The other vehicle slowed, paused, and drove on. And I was left alone in the darkness with him. Winter in the northern United States doesn't arrive quietly. It doesn't knock. It kicks the door in and dares you to survive it. People who haven't lived through it imagine snow as something peaceful. White fields, soft silence, cozy cabins. That illusion lasts until you're alone on a highway where the snow isn't falling anymore. It's moving. I learned that lesson the hard way, on a stretch of road most people never think about. Highway 2, cutting through northern North Dakota, where towns are sparse, cell signals are unreliable, and help is often measured in hours instead of minutes. I was 29 at the time, working as a regional equipment inspector for agricultural machinery. The job paid well, but it came with long drives between isolated towns, especially during winter when farms rushed to repair heaters and generators before temperatures dropped into lethal territory. That Friday started like every other workday, cold, gray, ordinary. The forecast mentioned moderate snowfall, nothing dramatic. I'd heard worse forecasts turn into nothing at all. Experience had made me careless. I left the town of Rugby just after noon, heading west toward Minot. The sky was a dull slab of gray, heavy but not threatening. The road was clear enough. The radio played softly, and my thermos of coffee steamed in the cup holder. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Then the wind started. Not suddenly, not violently. Just enough to push light snow across the road in thin, ghostly sheets. I slowed down slightly, hands tightening on the steering wheel. I'd driven through worse dozens of times. By the time the first road sign disappeared into the snow, I realized this storm wasn't interested in giving warnings. Visibility collapsed fast. One moment I could see a quarter-mile ahead. The next, barely the length of my hood. Snow didn't fall downward. It came sideways, aggressive and blinding, driven by wind that howled across the flat land with nothing to slow it down. The radio crackled, then went silent. My phone lost signal. The road markings vanished. I drove on memory and instinct, following what I thought was the center of the highway. That's when the car jerked. The tires lost traction, sliding on ice hidden beneath fresh snow. I corrected too hard, then overcorrected again. The world tilted violently, and before I could process what was happening, my vehicle slid off the road and slammed into a snowbank with a bone-rattling impact. The engine stalled. Silence swallowed everything except the wind. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. Snow immediately began piling against the sides of the car, filling the air with swirling white chaos. I tried restarting the engine. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. That was when the fear arrived. Not panic yet, but awareness. The understanding that this situation had crossed a line. I checked my phone again. No signal. Not even emergency calls would connect. The cold began creeping in almost immediately, turning the inside of the car into a refrigerator. I had an emergency kit. Everyone who works rural winters does. Blanket, flashlight, flares, protein bars. But emergency kits are comfort objects. They make you feel prepared. They don't stop time. I waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The storm intensified. Snow hammered the car so hard it sounded like gravel being thrown against metal. The temperature dropped below zero. My breath fogged the windows until the outside world disappeared completely. That's when I saw headlights. They appeared out of nowhere. 2 yellow eyes cutting through the white. Relief surged through me so strongly my hands shook. I flashed my high beams, honked the horn. The vehicle slowed and pulled up behind me. An older SUV, dark-colored, covered in snow and road grime. The driver got out. He didn't rush, didn't struggle against the wind. He moved calmly, deliberately, like the storm wasn't affecting him at all. That should have been my first warning. He knocked on my window. I cracked it slightly. Cold air blasted inside instantly. He was older, maybe late 50s or early 60s. His face was red from the cold, but his eyes were sharp and unsettlingly alert. He smiled too easily. "You're lucky," he said. "Roads closed both directions. Haven't seen anyone else in hours." I told him I was okay, that I'd wait it out. He shook his head slowly. "You won't," he said. "Not in this." Something in his tone sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with temperature. He offered me a ride, said he lived nearby, said we could come back for the car later. I refused. His smile faded, just slightly. He glanced up and down the road, as if checking something. Then he said, "At least let me check your tires." Before I could stop him, he walked around the car. I heard metal scraping, a sharp hiss. Panic exploded in my chest. I unlocked the door and stepped out, shouting at him to stop. That's when I saw what he'd done. My front tire was slashed clean through. He looked at me calmly. "You'll freeze out here," he said, "or you can come with me." The storm roared around us. The road was gone. There was no direction, no reference point, no safety. I ran. I don't remember deciding to. My body just moved. I bolted past him into the whiteout, heart hammering, lungs burning. I heard him shout something behind me, but the wind tore it away. The snow swallowed me instantly. Within seconds, I couldn't see the car, or the road, or anything at all. Just white. I walked fast, then slower still. My legs grew heavy, numb, my thoughts blurred. That's when the storm started to speak. At first it was just noise that sounded like whispers, then words, familiar words. My name, a voice I recognized. My sister, dead for 10 years. She sounded warm, calm. She told me I was going the wrong way, that I should sit down, rest, that help was coming. I believed her. I don't know how long I wandered. Time lost meaning. I felt warm, peaceful. I started taking off layers, tossing them into the snow without thinking. The last thing I remember is seeing lights again. A house. Yellow windows glowing softly. I stepped forward. Then everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital in Minot 3 days later. Search and rescue found me less than half a mile from my car. I had been walking in circles. Perfect circles. The man with the SUV was never found. Police said no one matching his description lived nearby. No footprints except mine were found around the car. They said hypothermia caused hallucinations. That explanation should comfort me. But sometimes, when winter storms hit and the wind screams across the plains, I hear my sister calling my name. And I know the snow remembers me. Nobody tells you how silent the world becomes when you're truly stranded. Not inconvenienced, not delayed, not mildly annoyed while waiting for roadside assistance under bright parking lot lights. I'm talking about real isolation, the kind where snow keeps falling, the wind erases all sound, and your car slowly disappears beneath drifting white like it was never supposed to be found again. I think about that night more often than I care to admit. I replay every decision, every turn of the steering wheel, every moment where I could have chosen differently. And the truth is uncomfortable. I could have avoided everything. My name is Heather, and I turned 34 last spring. That means I've survived nearly 2 decades of Michigan winters behind the wheel. I know black ice. I know lake effect snow. I know how fast conditions can turn deadly once the sun goes down. I'm not reckless. I don't speed. I don't ignore warnings. But confidence can be just as dangerous as ignorance. That Saturday in January, I was driving home from my cousin's wedding in Traverse City, heading south toward my apartment near Grand Rapids. It should have been an easy 2.5-hour drive. I'd done it dozens of times before. The reception had gone late, my feet hurt from dancing, and all I wanted was my own bed, not another overpriced hotel room that smelled faintly of bleach and disappointment. I checked the weather obsessively before leaving. Radar showed a narrow window of calm until around 10 o'clock. It was barely past 7 when I started the car. Plenty of time. That's what I told myself. The first hour was uneventful. Highway 131 was wet but clear. Wind gusts rocked my Chevy Equinox now and then, but nothing alarming. I kept both hands on the wheel, radio low, eyes scanning constantly. At around 8:30, snow started falling. At first it was harmless, soft flakes drifting lazily across the headlights. Pretty, almost. Then the flakes got thicker, heavier. The wind picked up, pushing the snow sideways instead of down. Visibility shrank by the minute. By 9, it wasn't snowing anymore. It was attacking. White swallowed everything beyond my hood. The road markings faded, then vanished completely. I slowed to a crawl and turned off my high beams because they only made things worse, reflecting light back into my eyes like a wall of glittering static. That's when my GPS chirped. Faster route available to avoid an accident ahead. I hesitated. I shouldn't have taken it. I know that now. But exhaustion makes you stupid. Comfort makes you careless. And the app promised to save almost 30 minutes. I took the exit. The road looked fine at first, recently plowed. Narrow, but manageable. Tall pine trees lined both sides, their branches bowed under the weight of fresh snow. The tires hummed softly against the pavement. Somewhere along the way, the pavement turned to gravel. I didn't notice immediately. The snow covered the transition perfectly. The tire tracks ahead of me grew faint, then disappeared altogether. But the GPS kept insisting I continue straight. So I did. The road narrowed further, snow deeper here, untouched by plows. My Equinox handled it decently at first. Four-wheel drive worked hard beneath me. I was barely doing 15 miles an hour, knuckles aching from gripping the steering wheel. I thought about turning around. There was nowhere to do it. The road was barely wider than the car, steep ditches hidden beneath snow on both sides. One wrong move and I'd slide straight down. The GPS said 11 miles remained before connecting to another county route. 11 miles. I repeated it out loud like a mantra. I can do 11 miles. The wind howled through the trees like something alive. Snow blasted across my headlights in thick sheets. My pulse thudded in my ears. I never saw the curve. One moment I was creeping forward, squinting through the white. The next, my front tires hit something buried beneath the snow. A frozen rut, maybe a rock, and the car jerked violently to the right. I overcorrected. The back end swung out. And suddenly, I wasn't driving anymore. I was sliding. The Equinox went off the road and down into a shallow ravine, maybe 6 or 7 feet deep. The impact wasn't violent, more like sinking into a massive pillow of snow. The airbags didn't deploy, but when I tried to reverse, the tires spun uselessly. I rocked the car. Nothing. Drive. Reverse. Drive again. Still nothing. I sat there, breathing hard, heart hammering so violently I thought I might pass out. Snow swirled around the windshield, slowly filling the space where the road used to be. Then I grabbed my phone. No service. Those 2 words felt heavier than anything else that night. I tried everything. Holding the phone to the window, opening the door, and sticking my arm out into the freezing wind, walking a few steps away from the car. Nothing. I was somewhere deep in rural Michigan, on an unmaintained service road that probably hadn't seen traffic in weeks. No one knew I was here. I'd texted my roommate that I was leaving Traverse City, but I never mentioned the detour. My gas tank was at a quarter full, enough to run the heat for a few hours maybe. The temperature dropped fast. Wind pushed snow against the driver's side door, piling higher by the minute. I turned the engine off to conserve fuel and sat in the dark while the storm screamed around me. The car groaned as gusts slammed into it. Snow tapped against the windows like fingers. I checked the time. 9:47 p.m. It was going to be a long night. For the next hour, I rationed heat. 10 minutes on, 20 minutes off. I ate a granola bar from my purse and sipped water slowly. Panic hovered at the edges of my thoughts, but my mind stayed strangely calm. Then, just after 11, I saw headlights. 2 yellow beams appeared in my rearview mirror, distant but unmistakable. Relief crashed over me so hard my eyes burned with tears. Someone was out here. I turned on my hazards and started honking. Short bursts, careful not to drain the battery. The vehicle came closer, slow and steady through the snow. A pickup truck, a large Ford F-150 with an extended cab. It stopped about 50 feet behind me. The engine idled. Nothing happened. I waited, confused. Maybe the driver was calling for help. Maybe he was figuring out how to approach safely. I honked again. The truck moved, but not toward me. It drove off to the side, crunching through deep snow until it sat perpendicular to the road, completely blocking any path forward or back. Then the door opened. A man stepped out. He was big, tall, heavy-set, wearing a dark winter coat and a knit cap pulled low. The headlights behind him turned his body into a silhouette, featureless and imposing. He stood there, staring at my car. Then he reached into the truck and pulled something out. A tire iron, the cross-shaped kind. He held it loosely, tapping it against his thigh as he started walking toward me. Slowly, deliberately. The relief vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, sick dread that settled deep in my stomach. I locked the doors. The click sounded impossibly loud. He stopped. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not the smile of someone offering help. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how alone I was. He said something, but I couldn't hear him through the glass. He gestured with the tire iron, motioning for me to roll down the window. I shook my head. He stepped closer. My mind raced. I couldn't drive away. I couldn't call for help. I couldn't run through knee-deep snow in dress flats. He walked to the front of the car, inspecting how I was stuck, then came to my window and tapped it with the tire iron. 3 slow knocks. The glass vibrated. I saw his face clearly for the first time. He looked normal. That was the worst part. Mid-40s, patchy beard, small dark eyes. Someone you'd pass at the grocery store without a second thought. He said I looked cold. He said he could help me warm up. I grabbed the ice scraper and held it up defensively. He laughed. Actually laughed. He raised the tire iron, and then headlights appeared behind his truck. Another vehicle. The man froze. He looked at the approaching lights, then back at me, and in his eyes I saw patience, not anger. Not frustration. Patience. Like he was pausing something he intended to finish later. He walked back to his truck calmly, climbed in, and drove away, disappearing into the storm. The approaching vehicle turned out to be a county plow truck. The driver spotted my tracks and called for help. Within an hour, I was pulled out and sitting in a deputy's car, shaking uncontrollably. They never found the man. I sold my Equinox 2 months later. I don't drive in snowstorms anymore, because I learned something that night. The snow doesn't just hide roads. Sometimes it hides monsters. February in northern Wisconsin has a way of reminding you how small you really are. The cold doesn't just sit on your skin. It presses into your bones, into your thoughts, into the silence between breaths. I had lived with winters my entire life, but nothing prepared me for what happened during that blizzard in 2024. My name is Connor Aldrich, and at the time, I was nearing my 11th year as a site supervisor for a construction company operating out of Ashland County. I wasn't reckless, wasn't naive, and I knew storms. This wasn't my first whiteout, not by a long shot. But that night taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the most dangerous thing during a storm isn't the weather outside. It's the people who use it as cover. 3 days before the storm hit, my wife had driven south to Milwaukee to visit her sister. She took our dog with her, which meant the house was quieter than usual. Too quiet, maybe. Our home sat nearly 2 miles outside town, a modest ranch-style place my grandfather had built back in the early 1960s. White pines surrounded the property on 3 sides, thick enough that once the snow started falling, the world beyond those trees simply vanished. By Saturday morning, the National Weather Service had issued a blizzard warning, 18 inches minimum, winds up to 50 miles per hour, possible whiteout conditions, mandatory travel restrictions after dark. I prepared the way anyone sensible would. Firewood stacked by the hearth, extra batteries laid out on the kitchen counter, bathtub filled with water in case the pipes froze, pantry checked twice. By mid-afternoon, I had accepted the fact that I wasn't going anywhere until Monday at the earliest. The snow started falling just after 4. At first, it was gentle, almost peaceful. The kind of snowfall that makes you nostalgic, that turns the world quiet and soft. I stood at the living room window watching flakes drift down, sipping a beer and thinking about nothing at all. By nightfall, that peace was gone. The wind picked up fast, driving the snow sideways. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. By 9 o'clock, I couldn't even see the mailbox at the end of the driveway, barely 30 feet from the house. The trees groaned and snapped under the weight of ice. Every few minutes, I heard a sharp crack echo through the darkness as branches gave way. I had the fireplace roaring, the Packers game playing quietly on TV, and a blanket pulled up over my legs. The power flickered twice, but somehow stayed on. My phone showed no service, which wasn't unusual during bad storms out there. I remember thinking how strange it was, how isolated I felt, yet how safe. Like the world had ended everywhere except inside my living room. That illusion shattered at 10:15 p.m. The pounding came without warning. Not a knock, a pounding. 3 heavy strikes slammed against the front door, cutting through the howl of the wind so sharply I jumped and spilled beer down my shirt. My heart lurched into my throat. My first thought was that something had blown into the door. A branch, maybe. But then it came again. 3 more hits, deliberate and rhythmic. And then I heard voices, muffled, distorted by the storm, but unmistakably human. I muted the television and stood there, barely breathing, listening. Nobody should have been outside. The county had shut the roads down hours earlier. My driveway alone was a quarter-mile of unplowed gravel that would trap any normal vehicle. I grabbed the old Louisville Slugger from the coat closet, an instinct I didn't even remember forming, and approached the door, staying off to the side of the window. Through the frosted glass panel, I could make out 2 figures standing on the porch. Both wore dark winter gear, with reflective strips across their shoulders and chests. One leaned close to the door and shouted something I couldn't make out over the wind. I flipped on the porch light. The beam barely cut through the swirling snow, but it was enough to reveal them more clearly. A man and a woman, both bundled tight, faces partially hidden by scarves. I shouted through the door, asking who they were. The man answered immediately, loud and confident. He said they were emergency services, county evacuation team. He told me there was a mandatory evacuation order for this area, due to structural collapse risks from snow load and wind damage. He said I needed to leave now. The woman nodded beside him, pointing back into the darkness where I assumed their vehicle was parked. Everything about the scene felt wrong. I asked them to hold their identification up to the window. The man pressed a laminated badge against the glass. It read, Bayfield County Emergency Management. At first glance, it looked legitimate, but the longer I stared, the more inconsistencies I noticed. No hologram, no seal. The photo looked poorly aligned, like it had been printed at home and slid into a plastic sleeve. I looked past him toward their vehicle. No flashing lights, no markings, just a dark pickup truck sitting with its headlights off, barely visible through the snow. Real emergency crews didn't operate like this, not in conditions this severe. When I hesitated, the man's tone changed. His voice grew sharper, more impatient. He said other homes nearby had already collapsed. He said I was putting myself in danger by staying. The woman spoke next, her voice calmer. Too calm. She said there was a warming shelter set up at a community center, and that they needed to take me there immediately. I noticed she kept glancing toward the truck. I told them my house was solid, built to handle winters far worse than this. I said I was staying put. The man leaned closer to the door, breath fogging the glass. He said they had orders to bring everyone out. He said I needed to open the door so they could explain the situation properly. Then the woman said something that made my blood run cold. She said they needed to come inside, just for a moment, to assess the structural damage from within. She claimed they had thermal imaging equipment in the truck and needed to check my basement for foundation stress fractures. As she spoke, the man slowly tested the door handle. The deadbolt held. I stepped back and shouted that if they didn't leave immediately, I'd call the police. The man laughed. He said the phone lines were down across the county, that they were the only help available for miles. I tried the landline. Dead. My cell phone still showed no service. That's when the pounding started again. Harder. Angrier. Between strikes, I heard them whispering to each other. Then I heard footsteps crunching through the snow. They were circling the house. I moved room to room, checking every window. All locked, all secure. When I reached the mudroom, I froze. The woman was standing right outside the glass. Her face was inches away, eyes empty, unblinking. She didn't speak. She just stared. Then she tapped the glass 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. I dragged a heavy bench in front of the door and backed away. That's when I remembered the CB radio in the basement, something my grandfather had installed decades earlier for emergencies. I made my way downstairs, flashlight shaking in my hand. The radio still worked. By some miracle, it worked. On Channel 9, someone answered. When I told dispatch what was happening, there was a long pause. Then the dispatcher said something that made my stomach drop. No evacuation teams had been sent out. No emergency crews were operating that night. Whoever was outside my house, they were not legitimate. He told me to arm myself. By the time I returned upstairs, the power had gone out completely. I loaded my hunting rifle and waited in the dark. When I finally confronted them, rifle raised, they backed down. They left without another word. A deputy didn't reach my house until dawn. He told me I wasn't the first call that night. Others hadn't been as lucky. Weeks later, 2 suspects were arrested for targeting rural homes during severe storms, posing as emergency workers, forcing evacuations, robbing houses. I never saw their faces again. But every winter, when the wind screams through the pines and snow slams against the windows, I still listen for pounding at the door, because storms pass. But fear like that never truly leaves. When my grandmother passed away in the spring of 2017, she left me something nobody else in my family wanted. 40 acres of farmland just outside Bozeman, Montana, along with an aging farmhouse that sat alone at the end of a dirt road most maps barely acknowledged. At 26, it felt like a strange kind of freedom. I had been living in Portland since college, paying too much rent for too little space, surrounded by noise that never truly stopped. Traffic, sirens, neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. When the lawyer told me the property was mine outright, no mortgage, no strings attached, the decision felt almost irresponsible in how easy it was. Everyone thought I was making a mistake. They reminded me the nearest neighbor was nearly 3 miles away. That winter, temperatures regularly dropped below 0. That grocery runs would take nearly an hour round trip on good days. But none of that scared me. What scared me was staying where I was and slowly suffocating in comfort. So I packed my life into a rented truck and drove east until the city lights disappeared and the sky got wider than I remembered it could be. The farmhouse had been built in 1952 by my great-grandfather. Thick walls, low ceilings, a wood-burning stove that radiated heat like a living thing. The land around it was flat and open, broken only by a weathered barn and a line of cottonwoods that bent endlessly in the wind. By the time winter arrived in earnest, I thought I understood isolation. I didn't. You don't understand isolation until a blizzard erases the world, until roads vanish, fence lines disappear, familiar landmarks dissolve into nothing, until your house becomes the only object left in an endless white void, floating in silence so complete it presses against your ears. The weather radio had been warning about the storm since before dawn, a powerful system dropping down from Canada, sustained winds, whiteout conditions, travel strongly discouraged. By noon, snow was falling so thick it felt like standing inside a shaken snow globe. Visibility dropped to 20 feet at best. I prepared carefully. Pantry stocked, generator fueled, extra firewood stacked by the stove, phone charged to full. The farmhouse was solid, warm, safe. Around 3 in the afternoon, I stood at the kitchen window watching the land erase itself, feeling a quiet confidence that comes from being prepared. That was when I heard him. At first, I didn't recognize the sound as anything real. When you live alone long enough, your brain invents noises. Wind becomes footsteps. Settling wood becomes whispers. But this wasn't that. This was a human sound. A low, broken moan, barely audible over the wind, rising and falling with raw desperation. It took several seconds for my mind to accept it. Someone was outside. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and moved toward the front door, my heart already starting to pound. I pressed my ear against the wood. The sound came again. Closer now. A man groaning in pain, right on my porch. I cracked the door open just enough to aim the flashlight beam into the storm. He was collapsed on my front steps. A man in his 40s, bundled in a brown canvas jacket and jeans, clutching his right leg. Ice clung to his beard and eyebrows. His lips were blue. His whole body shook violently. He said his name was Raymond. He told me he'd been driving the county road when the storm overwhelmed him, pulled over to wait it out. When the heat started failing, he tried to walk for help. Slipped on ice about 100 yards from my driveway. He said he felt something snap in his ankle. He said he crawled the rest of the way toward the porch light. I hesitated. Every instinct whispered caution. But I was standing over a man actively freezing to death. I dragged him inside. The cold followed him in like a living thing, biting into my skin as I slammed the door shut. He lay on the mudroom floor, gasping, thanking me between shivers. I called 911 immediately. The dispatcher told me emergency services were overwhelmed. Roads were impassable. Help would come when it could. Hours, maybe longer. She told me to keep him warm. When I hung up, Raymond was watching me. His smile looked grateful. It also looked wrong. I helped him into the living room and settled him near the stove, wrapped in my grandmother's old wool blanket. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. That's when I noticed the first thing that didn't make sense. From the kitchen window, I could see part of the porch steps. There were no crawl marks. The snow on the steps was smooth, undisturbed, sheltered beneath the porch roof. He should have left something behind. I told myself the storm must have erased it, but the timing didn't fit. He'd been moaning for minutes before I opened the door. I brought him coffee. He studied the room while he drank, his eyes lingering on doors, windows, exits. He asked how long I'd lived there alone. I lied. Said my partner was upstairs. He didn't believe me. He asked if the bedroom doors locked. I felt my stomach tighten. I excused myself to check the generator and called 911 again. Quietly asked if any abandoned vehicles had been reported nearby. None had. When I returned, Raymond was standing at the window, standing evenly on both legs. When he noticed me watching, he limped. Too late. I saw it. The act started slipping after that. He asked about neighbors, about road maintenance, about family. Each question felt like a probe, mapping how alone I really was. Then I heard the barn door, slamming. I had padlocked it. Ray heard it too. Something flickered across his face. Anticipation. That's when I knew. There was someone else. I locked myself in the bathroom and called 911 a third time. Whispered that the man wasn't injured, that I believed someone else was outside. Ray tried the door handle. Slowly. Silently. Then he waited. Red and blue lights cut through the snow minutes later. Ray ran. They caught him. But not the second one. The barn lock had been cut. Inside, scratched into the wall. She's alone. I sold the farm 3 months later, and I still wake up sometimes, certain I hear someone moaning outside my door.